Working Cows Podcast, episode 322. This episode is brought to you by C90 Ocean Minerals.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. This is Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the C90 Ocean Minerals studios. And this episode is brought to you by C90 Ocean Minerals. C90 provides complete mineral and trace element nutrition for your soil, pastures, and livestock. This fall, apply C90 to your soil and begin remineralizing and restoring your soil fertility. C90 feeds your soil microbiology so bacteria and fungi can better process natural nitrogen and plant nutrients. Next season, you'll enjoy more productive soil that produces higher quality pastures. Your animals will benefit from protein-packed, nutrient-dense grass that helps improve their vitality. Give our team a call or visit our website at c-90.com. That's www.c-90.com. Call 717-580-1458 and be sure to listen to Working Cows episodes 261, 282, and 312 to learn more. All those episodes will be linked in the show notes page for today. You can go there and learn more about the sea salt revolution. You can learn more about the importance of sea minerals for your soil's fertility as well as for your own personal health. So covering all the bases there. Encourage you to check out the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/322 for all of those links. Very excited to be joined today by Jeremia Markway. Jeremia is hosting a sheep and soil health school coming up in the first part of October. You can find a link to that in the show notes page for as well, or you can visit markwayranch.com to learn more about that. But I really wanted to talk to him today about how he got started in hair sheep, why he went with hair sheep, and some of the benefits to his operation from a soil health perspective and a cash flow perspective, as well as some of the logistical issues as far as keeping sheep in and some of those things. So very excited for this conversation today. Jeremia, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
You bet, Clay. Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Well, yeah, I really appreciate, what you guys have going on there, and I'd love to get educated. I've always used the fact that we have a good wool market here and people who understand how to shear sheep as a crutch for not getting into hair sheep. But I don't know that I've ever spent an episode really just devoted to talking about hair sheep and what they are and why they're attractive to so many people. It seems like everybody, whenever I would tell people we were getting into sheep, they're like, "Oh, you got to get hair sheep," and that was all the, holistic management, regenerative guys that were influenced by that way of thinking were the ones that were saying that. And I always thought, well, since we have a wool market and people who know how to shear, I don't know that it's as attractive, but I do want to learn some more. So if you could help me learn about hair sheep, that would be great.
Sure. Well, our hair sheep, they're primarily for the meat market, and a lot of our hair sheep in this part of the world and elsewhere go to more, I guess you'd say, urban centers where there's more of an ethnic population. The hair sheep, for those listeners that may not know, kind of like you alluded to, they have a wool, but it's a really low quality, and on a lot of them, it's more like the hair of a deer or something along those lines, So they shed that wool, that hair naturally every spring, or you hope they do anyhow. So, but yeah, they're usually a little bit smaller than a lot of wool sheep. Ours are a composite flock of Katahdin, primarily Katahdin, but they have a little bit of Dorper and Florida native mixed in with them. And those ewes will be about 125 pounds, so quite a bit smaller than some of your wool breeds, What they have in common with the wool sheep is that the sheep is if there's a perfect animal, in my opinion, for grazing, it's a sheep. We graze our ewes year round, and I've seen them fall through 11 inches of snow to get to grass that was underneath of it, and they'd rather do that than eat hay. So they're a neat animal. They complement cow operations really well. I don't know if there was anybody that was as much of a cow lover as myself, in the past, but 2011 we finally jumped into the hair sheep. And the only thing I could say is that I just wish we would have done it sooner, because they've kind of become our centerpiece enterprise on our operation.
Yeah. Have you guys then kind of gone from cow operation to more grazing days taken up by sheep then? Has that been kind of your transition?
Yeah. And a little background about the place. Mom and Dad started the ranch in 1970. I guess I'd be a fourth generation, as far as I can tell, farmer, rancher, whatever you want to call it, but so we've done a little bit of everything. We've run stocker cattle. We've had commercial beef cows and registered beef cows. And, right now, well, for the past 30 years, we've had straight Corriente cows that we've crossed on beef bulls and some Corriente bulls too. We raise some quarter horses and stuff too still. But, yeah, the sheep have, they've been more profitable for us than anything else. And so we've grown that part of the operation more. And then we do that in conjunction with custom graze and dry cows in the summertime, just to kind of take advantage of the forage that we have. We're kind of in the heart of the fescue belt, I guess you'd say. So the sheep by themselves, they do okay on the fescue, but you really need the cows in there to, they say cows make sheep pasture and sheep make cows pasture, and we found that really to be true.
So it's leader follower where the cows go through first. Is that what you're saying?
Actually, a lot of people do it that way. For us, we let the sheep go through first. So the sheep are a higher value animal for us. And so we let them go through and selectively graze. And then we come in with those fall calving cows, those dry cows that have, lower nutrient requirements and stuff. And we kind of clean up after the sheep then. So, it depends. People ask about that a lot, and it kind of depends on what the higher value animal is to you. But that seems to work pretty well for us.
Would it be true then that the carcasses of a sheep and a hair sheep and a wool sheep would be similar in size, or what I'm asking is there higher meat to bone ratio in the hair sheep than there is in the wool sheep?
I'm not sure what the wool sheep cut out, but like the hair sheep, typically if you kill a 120-pound wool lamb, like I was talking to a friend of mine the other day that they sell a lot of grass-fed lamb, out of a 120-pound live animal, you might get a 55 to 60-pound carcass out of that animal. So it's around 50% or just a little bit less.
And then are you kind of looking for that earlier shedding animal? You said you hope they shed. Are you kind of looking for that earlier shedding animal as a sign of a more adapted critter?
For us, we feel that's the case. We like them to shed off. Seems like they're maybe more hormonally imbalanced and things like that. They just take the heat a little bit better when they slick off faster. And then part of the deal too for us, we're kind of pushing the boundaries like a lot of people are in the eastern part of the U.S. with raising sheep in a high humidity, high rainfall environment. And one of the problems you'll have every spring with a lot of the moisture we get in May when we're lambing is fly strike. And that's a pretty nasty thing. For those who don't know, it's a blowflies lay their eggs in the fleece of the sheep, and then the maggots hatch and burrow down into the animal. And a lot of times you don't find them until it's too late. They don't show that they're weak until they're about too far gone. So that's one of the reasons that we really like them to shed out faster. It doesn't seem like the heat bothers them one way or the other too much, whether they shed out or not. But for that reason, we really like that.
Everybody always says kind of laughingly that the first sign of illness in a sheep is death. And then Dave Olala educated me and said the reason for that is because they're so susceptible to predators that they never show weakness until they're dead, basically.
Yeah. I would agree 100% with him on that. That's what we found to be the case anyhow. So good point.
Yeah. What were some of the important lessons that you learned early on in that transition that you maybe helped somebody who is thinking about making that transition avoid some of those same mistakes?
From cattle to sheep, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. First thing I would do is you want to have good facilities, and by that I mean basically perimeter fences. I think for a lot of cattle people that want to maybe try sheep out, they could get stock maybe a half a ewe per cow or something like that on their place. And even if they're rotating the cows around through a managed grazing system or something like that, those sheep will kind of go where they want and pick on the broadleaves, the weeds, and they're going to eat a lot of clover and things like that you want for your cows. But if you stock at a light rate like that, you can find out whether they're going to suit you or not. And you hardly know that they're there. So that would be one thing. We kind of just treat them like little cows, really, for the most part, other than with cattle. A lot of people maybe will check them once a week or something like that if they have an off-farm job and everything, and that's fine. But with sheep, they need to understand that if there's a management issue that needs to be addressed, it needs to be addressed sooner than later, because that's where a lot of the wrecks come from, which you hear about with whether it's predators or whether it's parasite issues or whatever. So it takes a bit of a higher degree of management, and I don't want to say sheep are for everybody, but if you can, if you're willing to do those things and whatnot, they can really be a good addition to your ranch.
Yeah. What are some of how do you guys contain them? How are you guys keeping them in sync with a rotation?
So all of our places are set up with a managed grazing system. We have electric, 3 strands usually of high tensile electric fence. We don't use any of the netting or anything, just because of personal preference. Most of our perimeter fences have just been modified. A lot of them were 5-strand barbed wire, and we've made them 6-strand barbed wire, where we added another wire down low and maybe had to lower the lowest wire that was originally there or something like that. Some of our perimeter fences are just that electric fence. There's a few places where we have woven wire due to, just being against a certain place that requires that. We want to be sure that they don't get out. I've seen people, and we've even used it before, where you just have an old barbed wire fence and you use 1 strand of high tensile about a foot off and about away from it, about a foot off the ground. And with that fence behind it, it usually deters them. The main thing with sheep is that where people start getting into trouble most of the time with them getting out is they try to push them too hard. They want them to graze every last thing, every last weed or something in there. And although they do eat a lot of weeds, there's certain times where they don't eat all of them. There's still times where they prefer them over other things and not. So when they get to pushing them too hard and get them hungry, that's typically where they have trouble with sheep getting out. If they keep them satisfied and full, there's usually not too much trouble with keeping them in.
Yeah, yep. I would say that's true in my experience as well, that satisfied sheep is going to stay where she's at for the most part. Do you have your paddocks are all 3-wire or, like you said, 6-wire barb or woven wire in some places? Are you subdividing at all in within those paddocks?
Sometimes we do, but what I used to do, Clay, is when I had a full-time job several years ago, I had, let's say that I'm going to use the place where I live as an example, where there was 5 or 6 main paddocks and they were long and narrow. And then I would use poly wire, to give them different breaks, and set up my different paddocks and whatnot. It works really well, but for me, it got to be too much of a labor deal where I was building the same fence 4 and 5 times a year. And so that's the reason we went to a more permanent situation with the high tensile. I give some things up by doing that, but I gain some other things. And I think that's something somebody, each person has to figure out what fits best in their situation and their quality of life that they want and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. No, that was one of the things for us personally is we were looking for a way to reduce labor and maintain a rotation on the sheep, and net fencing was what we had, and it's great. And I've grazed some places that you would never get anywhere any other way, or at least not contain them in there any other way. But it is a lot of labor to get it done, and so we were looking for a way to reduce that labor, and so we are still experimenting with sheep containment. But yeah.
Well, trust me. I mean, like I said, we've had them since 2011, and we're still experimenting because there's times I go back and forth between, wow, it'd be nice if, where I have this 3 or 4 strand of high tensile here, if I just had a 2 foot tall woven wire fence with hot on top, that'd be really nice. And, there's times where we always want to look at what's the cheapest, but cheapest is not always best, and so I encourage people to kind of think about that when you're setting up your system. And I'm not afraid to change things. So if there's a fence that's not working, I'm not afraid to move it, or I'm not afraid to do something completely different. But
yeah, I think everybody should probably start with some level of temporary infrastructure. And then when you, like you said, when you find yourself building the same fence, multiple times a year, or probably in my case, multiple years in a row, then, maybe it's time to think about putting that in permanently, because, Steve Kenyon has said it a lot, his biggest expense on his operation is labor, and so, and that, first of all, means that you're paying yourself, which is another conversation, but you're paying yourself. But then also you start to think about, well, if I do this and I do it over and over again, I'm ultimately paying myself less than I would be otherwise if I just did it one time and did it right from the start.
And nowadays, I mean, I know electric fences has gone up in cost and everything, but it's still relatively cheap, to put up. So
yeah, but, I think in our neighborhood, 4-strand barbed wire is $10,000 a mile, and so you're a far cry from that. And most of the electric fence can be put up by the individual. It seems to me just a lot easier to get done right than the barbed wire. It will be better, if you hire somebody to do it in general. But I think that sometimes the high tensile just seems a little easier to get done right and do well than the barbed wire, to me anyways. But maybe that's because I like high tensile, and I've made a commitment not to build barbed wire anymore.
I agree 100%.
It's
hard to move that barbed wire fence once it's in place, even if it turns out to be in the wrong spot. It's pretty hard to move it. So
I've even spliced barbed wire with high tensile before, just because I was maintaining my commitment not to use barbed wire. Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, C90 Ocean Minerals. C90 provides complete mineral and trace element nutrition for your soil, pastures, and livestock. This fall, apply C90 to your soil and begin remineralizing and restoring your soil fertility. C90 feeds your soil microbiology so bacteria and fungi can better process natural nitrogen and plant nutrients. Next season, you'll enjoy more productive soil that produces higher quality pastures. Your animals will benefit from protein-packed, nutrient-dense grass that helps improve their vitality. Give our team a call or visit our website at c-90.com. That's www.c-90.com. Call 717-580-1458 and be sure to listen to Working Cows episodes 261, 282, and 312 to learn more. Can you talk to me a little bit about this sheep and soil health school that you've got coming up in October? Tell me a little bit about that and what you are hoping to accomplish there.
Sure. Ray Archuleta and myself are putting it on. We've put on, I think, 3 of them now. We've had all at my house, and this one's going to be at Ray's house down in Seymour, Missouri. And basically, we kind of mix the 2 days up, but we try to give them an understanding of ecosystem processes so that regardless of whether they come from, South Dakota or Missouri or Texas or wherever, that they can apply the principles. And then I explain how we raise sheep, not that our method of raising sheep or what I do is the only way. It's obviously, there's lots of ways to do it. I tell them why I do something and why it works for us based on these principles, and how we try to work with nature, and how we make it profitable. So there's a lot of things to go over. Seems like it's really hard to get it all in 2 days. Actually, we're doing 2.5 days this time just because of that reason. But, there's a lot of visiting and learning from other students, and discussion among the students and us as instructors. And, we learn a lot of times just as much as they do. But the networking and stuff that you get there, just like with any school you go to or workshop, proves to be pretty invaluable. I know students that have been to the last several classes, they have kept in touch with each other, and I see them on we have a Facebook group page for those students, and I see them interacting and stuff, and it's really neat. So really good opportunity to learn about soil health and low input kind of sheep production. So.
Yeah, very good. Sounds like a great opportunity. And I'll have links to that in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/322. If you're interested in that, you can go there and find it. Great website, by the way, very user-friendly and easy to get around and find out more. So I'll have a link to that in the show notes page for today. But I guess what is it is there more to what attracted you to hair sheep over a wool sheep than just geography? Or, I mean, part of it, I think, from what I've heard, at least my understanding is that they're also more parasite tolerant. Is that true?
Having never raised wool sheep, I hate to say that they are or aren't. One of the reasons the main reason, I guess, that we went with the hair sheep is just, it seems like we don't grow very good wool around here. I've talked to several people that have the wool sheep around here, and we just don't have good wool growing conditions and stuff. And so that really didn't interest me that much. And then the shearing part and all that. As far as a parasite resistant and parasite resilience, you get on different Facebook pages or forums or whatnot, and people are talking about it, and people say their sheep never get worms, or they're just they don't have to deal with that. And I guess I'm one that's going to challenge that. I don't believe that. I think you can have the best set of sheep in the world, and if you mismanage them, you can have parasite issues. And I think sometimes people get set up for failure by thinking that, and they get the mindset of, I'm going to call it being a purist, where, they're not going to deworm and stuff. And it's like, to me, we try not to do that. Our mature ewe flock hasn't been dewormed in 8 years, but that doesn't mean that if I fail on my management that I could wreck them. You don't get a trophy for going broke and saying you didn't deworm your sheep. So that's kind of the way I see it. And to each their own, but I would rather sell a healthy 60-pound, 70-pound lamb that maybe had to be dewormed one time or something like that than the next guy that's bragging on, he didn't deworm anything, and he's selling a bunch of 40-pound lambs that are the same age, and he had lost 40% of his lamb crop. So to each their own, but it's like I said, I think people kind of get carried away with that a little bit. And I hear the argument a lot of times, well, wild animals, they will self-medicate, and wild animals aren't confined to the bounds of our farm or ranch either. And so it's a little different situation.
My neighbor isn't mad at me when deer that have grazed on my place also graze on his place, but he might not enjoy my sheep grazing there as much.
Right. Exactly.
And I think that's true. I've heard it said two different things. First of all, back to Dave Olala, he's my sheep guy.
I enjoyed his podcast, by the way. Yeah, it's good.
He's a really sharp guy. He's was an extension sheep specialist for the South Dakota State University, and just a real good thinker and all those things. But he said, you won't have to worm the sheep that you have the way that you're managing them, and we never have wormed the sheep that we have, but we are moving them frequently. Now, this year was the least frequent we'd ever moved them, and we lost a couple of ewes, and I'm not totally convinced that it wasn't a parasite issue, and so
right.
I think that I've heard it said too. The second thing I was going to say was I've heard people say, yeah, you can buy the best sheep genetics that have never been wormed in generations and generations. And if you take them out and you turn them out and you don't pay attention to them, you don't move them, you don't rotate them, those very expensive sheep genetics will die just like anybody else who doesn't, who isn't worming their sheep, but isn't moving them. So
right.
I've heard other people say the same thing you're saying, basically, is what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah. And a good manager can take a set of sheep that's compromised, maybe, and actually turn them around in a number of years. I used to manage a couple of research farms at a local university, and their sheep flock, when I got there, was largely built around show type genetics, and because that's what their focus was at the time. I'm not, knocking it or anything, but we wanted to move to more of a pasture lambing and grazing type system. And there was one ram there that nobody wanted to use because I guess they thought he was too conventional or something. And I was like, well, I like that one the best, so we're going to use him. And they went from having to regularly deworm that group of sheep and still losing sheep, even though they were deworming because they had a resistance built up in them, to where when I left, we hadn't dewormed that ewe flock in 3 years. And again, it's just management. It's nothing magic I did or anything. It's just management that took them from, 180 degrees, basically, I guess I'd say.
Right. It's choosing what you want to do, right? At the end of the day, that's basically what it comes down to. One of the things that I keep thinking about is eating healthy is hard, but so are knee replacements. So you just choose which one you want. Just choose which one you want to do,
That's right. That is exactly right.
Fighting parasites is hard. And so is moving your sheep all the time. You just choose which one you want to do. You can fight parasites, or you can move them more regularly and deal with less of that. It's not a cure-all, but
yes.
So
yeah, exactly. That's right. I think that's what Jordan Peterson says, isn't it? Life, something like life is hard. You got to pick your battles. You just pick which battle you want to fight because it's hard either which way. So.
Yep. And I think John Wayne said life's hard. It's harder if you're stupid. So I don't.
I kind of have to remind myself, right? I don't have to. I unintentionally remind myself of that quite often, but
Me too. So you said that you guys treat them kind of like little cows. Are multiple births more common in hair sheep than in cattle?
Yes. For our sheep, and let me preface this a little bit. So we breed in December, around the 1st of December, and we start lambing the 1st of May. So everything's pretty much, all of our lambing's done on pasture and everything like that. Like I said, fairly low input. On our mature ewes, we'll be somewhere around 1.5 to 1.7. And then on our ewe lambs, typically, we hope to wean 100% lamb crop, but usually we don't get that done. You'll lose some and whatnot, but it's pretty rare for our ewe lambs, the way we winter them on fescue and stockpile, for them to have more than one lamb. Now, if you go to graze and cover crops and things like that, I know we grazed some cereal rye last year after corn, and we sold some bred ewes to a friend of mine. I think he bought around 75, and he had 15 sets of twins on his ewe lambs, and it had to be just from the nutrition of the rye because we'd never experienced that before, and really don't want to either. That's pretty hard on a young female to have to be nursing and still developing herself. So overall, depending on how many ewe lambs we keep and everything, our flock average probably is about 1.45 or 1.5. And some people say that's not good enough, whatever, to each their own. It works well for us. And it's kind of like the deal of bringing up the low end of the cows to have a higher conception rate. What are you willing to do to get that? I'm not willing to put a bunch of feed in them and stuff to get that. So
right. Yep. And that Dave Pratt always does a great job of talking about that when he says, you're supplementing the ones that didn't need it as well as the ones that did. And so everybody's eating the supplement,
right.
Whether or not they would have bred without it or not. And so it's not really fair to say this is what it costs per head, because there's a bunch of them that would have done without it. And so really it costs you only that percentage that couldn't do it without it. That is really what it costs you. So breeding the first time, are you guys breeding them to lamb for the first time as a 2-year-old, or what? How old are they at their first lambing?
So that's one of the neat things about sheep. I should have mentioned earlier, but so these ewe lambs will get again, depending on whether they're grazing rye or whether they're grazing fescue, we'll get anywhere from 60 to 88% of them bred as 7-month-old ewe lambs. So they'll lamb as a yearling, and the higher rates we're getting when we come, like last year when we came off of rye, if you rough them through on, stockpile fescue, and depends on how the fall was and everything, like I said, you might get 60% of them or something like that. So usually it's somewhere in between there. Something we do that's a little different than a lot of people is we keep all of our own lambs, and we breed so that they're mates. All of our ewes are bred to 7-month-old ram lambs. And then after we're done using those, we'll sell those on the lamb market still in like February, whenever the market's still high, or we might sell a few as breeders after that. But I know a lot of people use mature rams, but we've gotten along really good using the ram lambs. And I'm kind of the notion that I try not to think I'm very smart. And what I mean by that is I don't think I can probably pick the best ones. And so we stock more ram lambs than we would mature rams, and kind of let nature figure out who the best breeders are. And I feel like that offers us a little more genetic diversity in a closed flock. And, it keeps us from being too proud kind of and thinking we know better than nature does, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So are you turning over the whole ram flock every year then, basically?
Typically, yes. Yes, typically, yes. We've bred to mature rams probably about, 2 years when we first got them, and then we used a few of them a couple years ago just because I had them sold, and then the guy ended up never showing up, and so we had them and I turned them out, sort of thing. But yeah, usually it's a one and done. We use them one breeding season and then they're done.
Sure. So, and is there a motivation for a closed herd as opposed to an open herd for you personally?
Couple reasons. One's just for the biosecurity, with sheep and bringing in other health problems. The other thing is people are afraid of inbreeding and whatnot, but we feel like they're just getting better and better. We got our original sheep from Joe and Hoss Hopping down in Oklahoma, and I know a lot of people in the sheep world know those guys and never heard of them. So we started off with really good genetics, and that's one thing we did right, thank God. But even as good as they were down there in their operation, the way I manage in my system and ecotype and stuff, there's going to be some that perform better than others. And so if I'm saving the ones that work the best for me, to me, they should just get better every year, as long as we're pulling out anything that's not working, So that's kind of the way we think about it. And the other thing is, there's a lot of good sheep out there. I don't know that, I'm not sitting here saying mine are better than the next guys or whatever, but I know if I know they're working for me, why would I take a chance on bringing in somebody else's stuff that I'm not sure how they were managed, or like I said, it's from a different environment. So that's kind of our thought process.
Yeah, it doesn't get more adapted than your own rams on your own ewes.
Right, exactly.
Very adapted to your zip code.
Yes, exactly.
And your management. And
my
too.
management, right.
Because that's probably more important than zip code, honestly.
Right, it is. It's a big deal, how you manage, and and how they adapt to that is a really big deal that most people probably don't think about that.
Yep. Well, Wally Olson has multiple times, to me personally, and maybe even on the podcast, mentioned the name Haas Hopping. So I'm sure he'll be pleased to hear that name brought up in another context.
Yeah, there you go.
But I should have asked this as a follow-up question earlier, but is that 1.4, 1.5 up to 1.7 a weaning percentage or birth?
Yes, that's a weaning percentage. Yes, correct.
Yeah.
And we typically wean our lambs at around 90 days. So we, like I say, we start lambing the 1st of May. We'll typically wean around the first week of August. And part of the reason we do that is just we have so much endophyte infected fescue that by that time of the year, the forage quality is getting really poor. You know, if you have a ewe out there that's got 2 big twins on her, 40, 45 pounds or something, it's almost equivalent to her weight or quite a bit of her weight anyhow, it really starts to pull those ewes down. And weaning at 90 days is pretty widely done in New Zealand and some other places. And so I'm sure, you could push them harder and take them longer into the fall. And some people do that, and that's fine. But for us, it just seems to work the best.
Sure. And so that endophyte infected fescue is an issue if you eat it down too far. Is that right? It's not necessarily an issue if they're grazing the tops.
Well, it's in the seed and in the base of the plant.
It goes to seed,
and so they do like the seed heads. Unfortunately, like when it flowers, they do like to eat that. And we're not much on clipping pastures, like a lot of people do. It's just the machinery cost and diesel and labor and stuff. Now, one thing about the endophyte infected fescue that with the cows, it really shows up, especially not so much with the Corriini cows, but with the beef cows, it really shows up. With custom grazing cows I have, they're just kind of commercial Angus or Angus cross cows. And they can get pretty hot. I have to make sure I have shade for them and everything, and they still get pretty hot. The sheep, I'm not going to say the endophyte doesn't affect them, but it's not noticeable if it does, if that makes sense. I don't see tails falling off. I don't see them trying to stand in water or anything like that, like the cows do, not panting and carrying on. So that's another positive for us with the sheep.
Sure. And would you say that they will start to show the effects of it if you let them get pulled down by not weaning at 90 days?
Usually the effects show up as just parasite infestation. Yeah. It's kind of like one of the main things to remember with, well, not only sheep production, but cattle production too, is just, as you know, nutrition trumps everything. So if you have an animal that's in good shape and good body condition and stuff, if she has that parasite challenge, she can handle it a lot better if she gets pulled down and is in thinner body condition. So
right.
No different than you or I.
For sure. How about their actual behavior as a flock? Do they stick together pretty well? Do they graze as a group pretty well?
Yeah, they do. It's for good or bad. When one of them goes, they all go. So, but I've seen them run through an electric fence that's pushing 12,000 volts, just like it wasn't on, and just because one of them zipped through it. So that's can be pretty maddening. But no, they stick together pretty well, and usually that's a pretty good deal that they do.
Sure. Do you think that there's something that sheep bring to an operation, like a missing piece that you wouldn't have from a soil health perspective? I know like cash flow and some of those things kind of maybe are obvious or go without saying, but is there something from a soil health perspective that you can do with sheep that you wouldn't be able to accomplish with cows alone?
Yeah, I think there's probably a few things, like on the place where I live here, if you let those cows into certain, I'll call them riparian areas, in the summertime, they can really do a lot of damage to those areas. Whereas a sheep doesn't like water really. They won't damage a lot of those sensitive areas and stream banks and things like that. Also with the soil health, one of the main things is just our utilization of different forbs and broadleaves that cows don't really like. For instance, ironweed would be an example here that we have a native forb or flour, whatever you want to call it, and the sheep absolutely love it. Well, the cows really don't, so they're utilizing that and then converting that into, manure, and it's going to improve your soil. The other thing about that is, as I mentioned with the rye, we started grazing cover crops just 2 years ago, but I found a farmer that was really into the soil health deal. Been doing no-till and cover crops for years, but he'd never been around livestock, and he knew that was the next step. And I got a hold of him through a friend of mine, and just went and talked to him. And he's like, well, I'd be willing to let you try sheep, but absolutely I don't want cattle, because his perception was that there was going to be a lot of surface compaction and pugging in his fields. And I know that can happen. I know that's often an unfounded fear, maybe, that a lot of people have, but it doesn't matter. It was his fear, and it's what he was going to operate under. And so I think with the sheep, you have a lot more opportunity for taking advantage of raising some cover crops, with crop farmers and stuff, that you wouldn't have with cattle. And also with that deal up there, there's no fences around there, so we're having to build fence every year, which that takes a little bit of time. It's not a big deal, but the facilities for bringing cattle in and taking them out would be a much bigger deal than it is for moving sheep in and out of that place. If it were to get muddy, I can be up there and have those sheep gone in a half a day, no problem, just with portable panels and stuff. But I couldn't do that with cattle as easily, so.
Sure.
Those are some of the main things that I'd probably stick out in my mind. But.
Yep. And is that 3-wire high tensile around the farm field then too?
Yeah. Yes. And it's fiberglass sucker rod post, and it's not the stuff that we've been using is just a soft 14 gauge wire up there. It's not even a high tensile. We just pull it tight by hand, and it worked pretty well. Use a battery charger, and knock on wood, we haven't had much trouble. Of course, they're in on pretty good feed, so it's like they're not really looking to go somewhere else.
Right. What about your corners there? What are you using for a corner?
Corners, we're just using a inch and the little bit bigger fiberglass posts. The line fence posts are 1 inch fiberglass, and I think the corners are 1.25 inches, and we just kind of brace them up with another one, wire it together. It works pretty well. There's a couple of those fields too that we graze where there are old hedge posts where they either had a fence originally and they left the corners there for a field marker or something along those lines. That's really nice when we have that. But anyhow, that's been a pretty neat thing and a fun deal. I'd wanted to do that for years, and like I say, the last 2 years got the opportunity, and it's a pretty neat deal. Sheep I don't know why every crop farmer doesn't have sheep. I mean, they're just perfect animal for that. Cleaning up the soybean stubble and the corn stubble, and then with cover crops, gosh, it is a real opportunity for them. I shouldn't say that. People be getting into them, and price will go to nothing, but flood the market.
Yeah. What about the cover crops? What have been some of the keys there for you guys, or how has that changed the way that you're managing as far as cover crops and sheep?
Well, the nice thing for us on that is that it opens up some opportunity. So whereas before we would have a big portion of these ewes on our places where we raise them all year long on our fescue, we're getting up on the cover crops on the 1st of December, and we're there till the 3rd week of March or something like that. So with that, then we've been able with some of our Corriente cows to graze all through the winter without feeding any hay. Some of the places we're talking about bringing in custom cows in the wintertime where we can charge quite a bit more because the grass is so good. And so it just kind of opens more doors, for us.
Sure. Yeah. What have been some of the other just keys for you in general for success? What are some of the tools that you use as far as sheep and some of those things? You mentioned portable corrals. Could you talk about some of that from an infrastructure perspective?
Yeah, we got some portable panels, I should say, from down in Texas several years ago, and it's relatively cheap. You don't have to have a lot of high dollar equipment and stuff to work sheep. I will say that it's nice to have a good setup, because otherwise you can get rather frustrated pretty quickly working them. But still, for a few $1,000s, less than 10,000, like probably less than 5,000, you can be into a real nice little portable sheep setup or something like that. Really, our operation is pretty bare bones. We do have a tractor, and we do have a brush hog that we don't use very often. We have a rental place that the gentleman we rent from likes it flipped every year, once a year. So we do that just kind of for his sake and neighbor relations and that sort of thing. We pretty much operate with four-wheelers, and that's pretty much it, Clay. I mean, our overheads are pretty low, and they really don't need to be anything more than that. We can kind of get done with it, what we need like that. I always kind of say a four-wheeler, a chainsaw, a drip torch. That's probably my biggest three things. And so my brother-in-law did buy an old, used, worn-out skid steer several years ago, and with that root grapple on it, and that thing is awful handy for, when you're cutting hedge post or something like that and dealing with things like that. But yeah, it's pretty low overhead.
Yep. I think if in my experience, at least, if there was ever a shortage in the supply of baling wire, the sheep places that I've been around would be in trouble, because baling wire is a huge tool.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is for sure. You need a good roll of soft wire, baling wire to tie things up. That's very true.
And it's not a knock on them. It's just that they're a smaller critter. You can keep them in with less
Right.
Infrastructure. So we went to running, and we went to running calves through a tub at one time, and we found or running calves through a calf table, and we found that calf size panels worked really well for sheep, and so that was kind of what we had as an experience, and yeah, right. I agree. It doesn't take as much, but it is nice to have some good stuff around for those big working days. So
yeah, especially the older I get, it becomes more more important to me. So.
Yeah, for sure. I had a couple people, some friends of mine, a couple that's looking at getting into hair sheep, and they were wondering if they're more likely to breed out of season, or do you have to keep the bucks and the ewes separate so that you're not getting lambs in a off season?
Yeah. They're pretty strong seasonal breeders, breeding the tightest and the most fertile. It seems like closest to the shortest day of the year. But once those days start shortening up, and after June 20th, 21st, whatever, when you start getting into August and September, those ewes, if they're in good enough shape, they will rebreed, and you will end up with January lambs. So, when I told you earlier, like we've kept some bucks over for somebody to buy later on, a lot of times we just left them right in with the ewes until the 1st of July, and then we'd pull them out because of that. But we weren't worried about them breeding anything. Everything was pretty much bred already. So it's not like they were going to do anything. And then when they were lactating early like that, they weren't going to come back in heat. Some people try to do the out of season breeding and get 3 lamb crops in 2 years. I don't know. For us, it's just not worth the extra labor and expense, and for what you get. I know some people have luck with it using cedars and different things. When I was at the university, they did some research on that with fall lambing, like lambing in September. And, they were talking about getting a breed up of 80%, and then most of them that bred had singles. So for me, it's not really worth that. Other people have had good luck with it, but
yep. And I think that the way that you're managing them, where you're breeding with them in December or so for however many days, and then selling them in February, right? Those same ones that you bred with in December are going to get, those same rams are going to get sold in February.
Right.
And so you don't have rams around for breeding out of season necessarily, right, under that regime of management.
Exactly. And that if you don't, those rams, they're escape artists. I mean, if they smell those ewes coming in heat, it takes a pretty good fence to keep them in, and they can smell a long ways. I mean, the joke is kind of, how far you need to keep them away, and 30 miles. I mean, that's a joke, but still there's a little bit of truth to that. So, it's pretty amazing.
Sheep jokes are the best jokes, because we were in Wally Olson's marketing school, and somebody asked him, how old does a ram lamb have to be before he can breed his mother? And he said, about 3 days.
He's not far off.
Yeah, and then he said, you go out there and you swing a ram lamb over your head, you breed 30 ewes. So
yeah, that's exactly right. It's it's pretty amazing.
There's a famous story in our neighborhood of this guy that was chasing a ram, wool ram, but a ram nonetheless, out of his place. He was trying to capture it. It was his lamb or his ram, and it got out. But it looked like it was almost dead when it got out, and he thought, it went down in the canyon and died, and he didn't go looking for it. But he let his neighbor know, hey, I chased that ram. I didn't catch him. He got away from us. He's down in the canyon. Keep an eye out for him. And the neighbor said, yeah, I'm not too worried about it. He probably did go down in there and die. Well, come December, they started lambing, and that one ram got 200 ewes bred.
Oh my! Wow!
And he looked half dead when he went in there.
That doesn't surprise me. It doesn't seem possible, but if we could only get bulls to do that, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, Jeremiah, anything else that you wanted to cover today, or anything else that you had on your mind as far as this conversation about sheep?
I think the main thing, is just like with anything with ranching, just, try to keep it as simple as possible. More complicated you make things, seems like the more headaches you have, and the less likely you're going to continue to do it. And, but try it out. And, if someone's wanting sheep, I would get enough of them to make it worth your while, but not too many to, make you pull your hair out yet either, while you're still learning and everything. And, I can't say enough good things about them for what they've done for us, and not only financially, but like you said, for the land and stuff. And that's the main thing. We try to be good stewards and try to make it better than what we have or what we found it and everything. And they help us to do that. So
right,
I just appreciate the chance to come on with you and visit with you a little bit, Clay.
Yeah. Well, Jeremiah, I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very good stuff there with Jeremiah. Really excited about what he's got going on there, and really would encourage you to check out the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/322, in order to learn more about the Sheep and Soil Health School with him and Ray Archuleta together at Ray Archuleta's place. So quite the opportunity there to learn from one of the soil health pioneers in the industry. Coming up next week, I think I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach with the episode and share with you some of the bonus content that has been recently released to Patreon supporters. And so basically this is in celebration of the 100th episode of Patreon content. I've produced 100 episodes of Patreon content, usually uncut content that is specifically questions that I have for the guests that I record after the episode. And so, for example, with Jeremiah, we talked a little bit about some of the horses that they have been running as part of a operation selling horses. And so we talked about some of those things. And every guest, I try to capture around 10 minutes of bonus content for Patreon supporters. And so I want, in celebration of 100 of those being produced, I want to share with you some of the recent ones that I have recorded, and maybe just show you what is available as part of the bonus content that we are producing here at the Working Cows Podcast. So look forward to that episode coming your way real soon on the Working Cows Podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.